Hey, Rush for Glory, War with Mexico. This is a S&T game from the 3W period. Not the best time for games in general. This is a very innovative system. I don't know if it's adds much for it. I have not played it before. I picked this up back when I was picking up all kinds of stuff that kind of intrigued me. I've played Halls of Montezuma. I don't remember it all that well. I only played it once, honestly. I know it had its issues. But let's talk a little bit about what we have here, and then that'll give us enough, to hit the rolls and start playing. So, the map's a weird sort of point-to-point map, where you've got your regions, and we'll talk about what the values in each territory mean, and these connections, which have a cost on them. That cost is going to be friction points, which, like most friction point systems, are a representation of the damage to the units, which can be applied through either combat or through movement. It's an interesting choice, but it creates a very different looking game in a lot of ways. You have the actual regions themselves have two pieces of information on them. The friction points that you can recover if you rest in a particular area. And you'll notice some areas are really not good places to be, and others are quite decent. And then an amount of morale points, which is basically the amount of victory point type things that each territory is going to gain, give you or lose you if it's conquered or whatever. Well, that too has an interesting mechanism. The counters themselves, well, these are little control markers, nothing exciting there. You've got leaders. We'll talk about the values on the leaders. I don't quite recall them. You have units. Now, the units are a little weird. They're broken up into different types, different quality and types. So for cavalry and artillery, everything's just by type. But for infantry, you have three different types: seasoned, regulars, and conscripts. This is the Mexican-American War. The Mexicans are the only ones who have the conscripts. They don't represent a number of strength points. They're just holding counters, a la, let's say some of the Zucker designs where you have, an infantry unit and you can put so many strength points in it or whatever. But they're a little bit more flexible than that. They're just really places where you throw strength points. There's no limitation or whatever to what you can put. And they're going to be represented on these sheets, which have basically stacks for each leader and some stacks that maybe don't have leaders in them. And then you mark, I guess, the type of unit over here, the number of the unit, which is unique across all types. So that's really the ID for that. And how many strength points are in it? And you also, I haven't written them down yet, have the fatigue points. I did for the Americans, I didn't for the Mexicans. The fatigue points that those units have already have accumulated against them at any given point. Now, the quality of the unit determines its minimum number of fatigue points. So what we're seeing here, these are minimal values. So for the US, regular units have a minimum of 5 fatigue points. You can't go below that, but the seasoned units have 0. Cavalry have a minimum of 6, etc. And that's going to affect the way the combat system works. Now, what else do you have? You have some special chromie tables for singular events in the game. Oh, here they are. So I can copy them from there instead. You have, I don't know what this is. You have a determination of the combat quality of the unit and whether or not it's going to disintegrate at at the particular appropriate time in the turn. For certain high-ranking leaders in the game who can command a lot more troops, there are control boxes. I don't know how much they're going to help. I'm using them, but honestly, I think it might be better to have them stacked on the board. It's not like they necessarily have more pieces stacked with them, which is kind of the thing. All right, let's dig in. And again, this is a very, very different system from what you're used to in most war games. And I'm not going to be able to say much about it as we cut through the rules until I see it in action, really, because it's hard to tell what's going on here. Okay, so the leaders on the left-hand side is their combat rating. That's going to impact the actual combat system, which we don't have an actual combat chart here. We'll have to hit how that works, because I'm having trouble recalling. My mental state is not the best. And an efficiency rating, which, again, I don't really remember what that does. That's the ability to lead and administer troops, but I know it impacts the friction points. Okay. The sequence of play, you're allowed to slap depots down on the map, and I've got one I haven't put down yet. I'll probably be putting it at Corpus Christi. It's got to be in America. And basically they have a range of 3 area connections. It doesn't matter how tough the area connections are, which is a little weird to me, but okay. If you are out of supply, you will take 10 friction points for being out of supply. You're in supply in your own territory, which means the Mexicans largely are going to be in supply. This guy starts out not. They do have depots, and there's the possibility of them making an invasion of the U.S. But players get reinforcements, which are, there's just a whole list of them. They're marked here which turns reinforcements come in on. That's a helpful little thing. What's not marked here is the month that the turn is. The turns are basically 1 month each, and they left that off the thing by accident. The U.S. Okay. First you do the movement phase for each player. So each player has their own sequential I go, you go type turn. If it's turn 6, you roll to see how long Polk is willing to delay or is going to delay on his invasion. What the hell is going to happen in the game during that time? Yeah, I don't know. On turn 8, you can roll for Veracruz landing and pull units off the map to prepare for an invasion of Veracruz, as historically happened. And then there's a Veracruz subphase if you invade on turn 10, 11, or 12. There's a special roll for Veracruz. We'll hit that. And then you handle normal land movement, which is what you will normally be doing on each turn. Then you go to the combat phase, and then if you did not move or fight, now there's nothing that actually marks this, so we're going to have to kind of tilt counters or something. If you're in supply and have not moved or fought, you get to get your friction points back according to that left number. And then the Mexicans get a similar turn, but without all the little special stuff going on in there. They just have the movement, combat, and friction point. Then you check the morale gains and losses for capturing territories. Probably want to compile that as it happens. See if somebody won the game, and you move the game turn marker. Okay. So movement, like I said, there's this inherent friction point for unit types. You are allowed. Okay. Movement is from one location to another connected by transportation line. You can move to a within friendly territory without the use of leaders. However, if you move into neutral, captured, or enemy territory, you must have a leader with you. A force of 6 strength points or less must be accompanied by a subordinate leader. Now this is actually problematic because Anasta here starts with more than 6 strength points, which means he can't leave there initially. Okay. Wow, the spaces are, I don't know, they don't feel right. Like, you put spaces like this in and I feel like there should be connections going across. So, whew. I mean, they may not be located where they actually are, and then you could have this kind of weird chaining or whatever. But okay. And what it means is it's going to create channels like point-to-point games do that maybe represent the terrain, but that representation that you're seeing in your head doesn't really match. You really have to kind of be able to internalize what these numbers and connections actually mean, or just treat it as a graph game and not really worry about, what the terrain that you're trying to represent there is. But it kind of makes my head hurt to try to deal with these in general. Okay, in order to move, you take friction points, and that's based on the number on the line between 2 areas. That's the number of friction points your force is going to gain, each unit in your force. Now, you can go through as many locations as you wish, but you cannot move any higher than 30 friction points. Anything more than that, you have to stop and accumulate your friction points, etc. When a unit or force has completed its move, you go to the disintegration table over here and roll for each strength point. Lots and lots of die rolling in this game. In order to see if it disintegrates and is removed from play. Note a few leaders have an efficiency rating that will reduce the friction point die roll, and that is the organizational rating to the right on the leader counter. Also, most unit points have an intrinsic number of friction points which they start with and can never be reduced to. In addition, friction points are accumulated from turn to turn. So if you don't rest, you will very quickly start to fall apart. Okay. The top left number of each location is a replenishment number. What do they mean, top left? There's just 2 numbers and they're on the bottom. And also represents the number of friction points each turn. Each unit is reduced if it starts in the location and doesn't move or fight. Well, that is the replenishment number as far as I know, but maybe I'm missing something. Also, if a unit does not move during its turn, it does not roll for any disintegrations, which is an important factor. Okay, unit breakdown buildup. As strength points are brought into play, each unit type, despite the number of strength points, should be represented by 1 counter. However, before moving units in a particular location, you're allowed to split it into different counters so you can move them around. You're also allowed to combine counters as long as they have the same friction point value and they're the same type, etc. Combine strength points in a counter or between counters. That becomes somewhat problematic, and honestly, I think you should be allowed to incur friction points because there are real problems if you don't have enough counters. So since there's a really limited counter mix in the game, let's say you have a unit with 8 friction points, a regular unit with 8 friction points, and one that has 12. If you want to, you should be able to combine those into a unit with 12. That's not allowed by the rules specifically, but it seems like only a fair thing to do because otherwise you might be losing your right to get any reinforcements at all because of that. Another option would be to eliminate a unit somewhere, which, again, is not allowed by the rules. This is that. Okay, and then they give an example of movement to see what happens. Example of replenishment, which is simply subtracting from your friction points down to your minimum. No more than 30 strength points from each side may be present in a particular location at the end of movement. Again, this is going to be kind of hard to look at Especially when you have this column of numbers and this column here, and it's like, what? The exception is Mexico City, which can have up to 40 Mexican strength points. If for any reason at the end of your phasing player's combat phase, if either player has an excess strength points in a location, the excess is eliminated. The roster sheet, I've already kind of explained what that holds in it. Here's the combat chart. Not on the board. Leaders. Okay, in order to move outside of friendly territory, you have to have a leader. Each country has 6 leaders on their side, 2 major and 4 minor. The subordinates can only carry 6 strength points with them. Major leaders can move with a force of any size, although that 30-point strength point limit at the end of your turn may be an important thing to keep in mind. In order to move a leader, the unit must start the movement phase in the same location with the leader. You can't pick up. Any number of units or leaders can start in the same location, and they can freely transfer at the start of the movement phase. A leader moving with units may not pick up units while moving, but they can drop them off. What does it mean to drop them off? Well, you're going to have to keep track of their friction point and whether or not they moved, and in order to check to see if they disintegrate from movement. Some leaders have a number on the lower right-hand side of their counter. This is their efficiency. Units which move their full move with a leader, I assume, are stacked with the leader during all their movement, as opposed to, geez, I don't know. See, that's the only way you can move. You either move your full move with a leader. I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to say there. They can subtract that number from their unit disintegration die roll. Say a force of 10 strength points of regular infantry moves with Scott. At the end of their movement, they have a total accumulation of 22 friction points. Look at the 21 to 25 column. On the disintegration table, a die is rolled for every strength point. However, a 2 is subtracted from every roll because Scott, who's not on the board yet, because his reinforcements is based on the Veracruz invasions, would be subtracted. And what do we have here? So only a roll of 6 each time the die is rolled would eliminate a strength point. So far, these numbers aren't used on this chart for the movement. The attacking quality of the class is the important thing there. And we'll see that when we get to combat, which, again, is a completely different type of design. Some leaders affect combat. The left-hand number is the number the combat die roll is modified. For the attacker, the number is added to the die roll. The defender, it'll be subtracted. If there's more than one leader on a side, only one major and one subordinate leader can combine to modify the die roll. So there is some value to stacking a subordinate with you. And you get to choose your best there. A leader that moves with units and drops off all of them in the course of movement may continue to move alone. Now, does that mean that those units didn't move all their movement with that leader? It's the only way I can justify that clause being added, but it seems a little weird that the leader doesn't help them move. But I guess he's running on ahead, so he's not actually able to help. So, I don't know. They can move alone up to a total of not more than 30 friction points. The leader themselves is not affected by friction points. And the reason you do this, one reason you do this, is to throw your leader into a combat that maybe you don't want to bring his units with. Okay, to get their modifier. Combat is between opposing forces on the same location. The moving player either moves into a defending player's location during his movement phase and stops, or if the combat odds are sufficient, he can overrun and keep moving. Also, if the phasing player starts his movement phase in the same location with enemy units, he either has to stay in counterattack or move out of the location. But if possible, not along the same line from which his opponent entered the location. Okay, that if possible disturbs me because it would always be possible not to move. But if your only way out is the way the enemy entered, I guess you're allowed to leave that same way. I don't know. After the moving player has moved all his units, any areas that contain forces from both sides will have combat. The moving player is the attacker in such a case, and the attacker resolves the combat in whatever order he wishes. First, you determine the class of the attacking and defending units. This is resolved by taking the unit class table. Different unit types and unit types with different friction point totals must determine their class separately. For example, the US player attacks with 2 strength points of seasoned infantry that have 5 friction points. This is not how you explain the rule, right? To say you determine the class using the unit class table, which is here, the disintegration table. But let's keep looking. Okay. 4 strength points of regular infantry with 10 friction points and an additional 4 strength points of regular infantry with 15 friction points. Consult the unit class table. A die roll of 3 for the season. Okay, so you look at the particular type of unit and its friction points, and now you start rolling the class for each one. And we're going to have to write this shit all down on paper as we're fighting. A die roll of 3 for the seasoned infantry gives them a class of 1. Okay, so we were saying it's seasoned infantry with 5 friction points. So that'll be here. A die roll of 3 says they get a 2. That's nice. 2 strength points of seasoned infantry that have 5 friction points. A die roll of 3 gives them a class of 1. Not in my book. What are they talking about? I don't know. I think that's just lying. A die roll of 3 gives the regular unit with 10 friction points a class of 2. Yeah, I buy that. Okay. And a die roll of 5 gives the regular infantry with 15 friction points a class of 4. Yeah. Okay, these 3 results are then added together, which gives you a 1, it's actually a 2, but a 2, that's 3, 7. And then you divide by the number of results, not the number of units or anything like that, the number of different types of unit that are there, and that gives you an average battle class, attack class, whatever, which would be 2.3, and it's rounded down to a 2. You round down, well, you round up on 0.5 or higher. And you round down on 0.4 or less. So if it's between 0.4 and 0.5, you're in an undetermined low area. We know what they mean. But now you take a difference between the 2 different players' combatant classes. If the attacker has the lower class, you subtract the difference from his class result. If the defender has the lower class, you add the difference to the attacker's class result. For example, if the attacker's class is 4 and the defender's is 6, the difference is 2. This is subtracted from the attacker's class to give a final combat class of 2. Now, combat classes range between 1 and 6, which is a little weird, but we'll see. I think they specify that, yeah, you can't go below class 1 nor above 6. Now you determine combat odds. This is the strength points of each side, standard ratio here. And now you go to the combat table and find the raw odds. 2 results produce the odds column shifts to determine the final odds. They are, when U.S. forces attack, they get 2 column shifts in their favor. Boom. If the units are defending in a location with mountain or swamp, it shifts 1 in the defender's favor. Well, how do we tell mountains and swamps? Okay, we've got some little squiggles here, which were kind of invisible. Swamps look like watery things. These are mountains. This is swamp. Barely discernible on the map. Seriously. This is going to be really, really hard to see. They did a horrible job with that. Okay. So where are we? Okay. Where did we hit this? Okay. Odds can never be more or less than the combat table indicates. Odds made at final odds greater than or less than 1-to-1 cannot be made, which actually means you're not allowed to enter the space. Now, how do you determine that? Yes, you can know that. You can know what the odds are going to be before you fight. It's the class value you won't know. Attack odds greater than 4-to-1 are going to be considered 4-to-1. Now here we get to weird shit. However, the U.S. could attack at 1-to-3 and with their automatically shift when attacking get to a final odds of 1-to-1. But if the defender's in swamp or mountains, the odds go back down to 1-to-2 and the attack couldn't be made. Additionally, if the initial odds are, say, 6-to-1, this automatically goes to 4-to-1 before any shifts are applied. As an example, if the U.S. attacked at 7-to-1, the odds would go to 4-to-1. If the defender's in a swamp, it goes to 3-to-1, but then the American 2-column shift comes in, bringing it back up to 4-to-1. Just weird. Next, you roll a 6-sided die, which is modified by the leader's combat value ratings. And this is going to be a differential between the total combat ratings of each side. And if the defender has any heavy artillery, the die roll is modified down by 1 for each heavy artillery strength point in the game, in the battle. And I think there are 2. The Mexicans have 2 heavy artillery at the beginning of the game. I don't know if they ever get any more, or if the U.S. does not. They don't have pieces for it. Next, find the combat results by cross-referencing the final odds with the final class of the attacker. Now, it only matters if you roll a 1, a 6, or a 2 through 5. Remember, the die roll is modified by the leaders. Getting those 1s and 6s probably means you have a leadership advantage. Normally, you can count on the 2 through 5 result. Okay. So what are the different results? D/E is defender eliminated. We don't have those, we have DEs. The slash is extra. Exchange. The attacker is allowed to choose how many of his strength points he wishes to kill, and the defender has to eliminate that same amount. The attacker must give one up. Half exchange is the same way, except for every strength point the attacker chooses to lose, the defender is going to lose 2. AR and DR is the attacker or defender have to retreat. AR, DR with a number. The attacker or defender retreats and takes friction points on each strength point that's retreating, in addition to the cost to move to the adjacent location. You pay friction points on either type of retreat, but this gives you an additional friction point cost for retreat. Contact, you both stay in place, and the phasing player has to either leave or fight again. Units in Mexico City or New Orleans, which are automatic victory spaces, may ignore retreat results and take double losses in friction points and stay in place. What does that mean as to double losses of friction points? I don't know. Obviously, I can double the +2, but how do I double the retreat point cost? Do I do that? Not clear. I'm going to assume the answer is no. A retreat may not be into an area under sole occupation of enemy forces except as a last choice, and only if an overrun can be achieved. We haven't hit them yet. It may be into an area with forces of both sides that have not fought yet this turn and have a contract result. In that case, the retreating units can enter the area but will not be part of the battle. However, they will suffer the same consequences that occur to other friendly units. Well, I would say we're not going to try to remember that they won't affect the battle of a contact result for the next player turn. I think that's an error. A retreating unit should try to retreat towards friendly territory, but if only one location is available, it may enter it even if it seems to advance the retreating force. And then they give a priority of the retreats. Mexicans should try to retreat towards Mexico City, U.S. towards Texas. Well, if you're in Louisiana, it could be weird, but okay. Whatever. To a location empty or containing friendly forces, to a contested location, to an empty location towards enemy forces, to a location containing overrunnable enemy forces. If surrounded by non-overrunnable enemy forces, they'll just be eliminated. When retreating, for every strength point of cavalry the attacker has more than the defender, the friction points are added on. That number of friction points are added on to each retreating strength point. So that's the pursuit roll in this. if you have cav bonus, you get to cause that much extra friction point equal to the difference in the cav. If a result is a DE, the entire force disintegrates, and if a leader is with the eliminated force, you roll a die. On a 5 or 6, the leader is eliminated. Otherwise, they're out for 2 turns. Overruns combat that occurs automatically during movement or retreat. When the moving player enters a location containing enemy units and he has odds of 5 to 1 or greater, the enemy units are simply eliminated and the moving player may continue to move at no penalty. Terrain and other factors have no effect on overruns, but the U.S. gets its 2-column shift. Oh, God. My head's about to explode. Now I know why I can't remember the system. I only read it last night. Okay. Supplies. Units are always considered in supply in friendly territory. These are locations friendly controlled at the beginning of the game and are color-coded as such, the green and the red. A force of 6 strength points or less, even in enemy or neutral territory, need never trace supply. They're considered foraging on the land. Well, gosh, that's anything a major leader's not leading, but okay. However, a force of over 6 points when moving into enemy or neutral territory must trace supply or suffer the effects. Larger forces trace supply by using depots. The first depot must be located in a location within friendly territory. Supply can then be traced up to 3 locations into captured territory, not counting the location the depot is located. To further extend the supply chain, you need another depot in a vacant captured location up to 3 locations from the original depot, and you extend it up to 6 locations. The total chain is 3 from the second depot then. If more depots are available, the chain can further be extended using the same procedure. There aren't a lot. The U.S. has a total of 3. I think Mexico has 2. However, if the path of supply becomes blocked by enemy units, the supply chain becomes severed and the forces will be put out of supply. Supply may be traced into a contested location but not through it. During the mutual supply phase, every unit out of supply is assessed a penalty of 10 friction points. Plus, units out of supply may not reduce friction points. But remember, this is only for stacks of more than 6. Depots do not use standard movement. They're placed where needed. One already on the map can be picked up and relocated. Since supply is determined prior to movement in combat, if in supply, a unit is considered in supply for all purposes until checked again in the next game turn. There was a typo somewhere in the sequence of play, I think. Let's see. Mutual supply. Units out of supply are immediately assessed. Units in supply remain so throughout the entire game. No. The word turn needs to be there. I remembered that one. Obligatory complaint about this camera sucking power at about twice the rate, at least, of earlier Averios that I have, like this one, which the damn folding screen ends up disconnecting the wire and so I can't see what I'm doing, which maybe I don't need to do, maybe I do, but the thing I most need to see on the screen is how much time I have left on the video, which no longer can be seen on this stupid camera. So maybe I should just say fuck it and go back to the old ones, which work just fine, except I can't see whether or not they're recording or anything. Oh boy. Okay, so what are we looking at here? More about depots. The Mexican has 2 depots. They cannot be placed until the turn Mexico is first allowed to invade the United States. They may then be placed anywhere in Mexico, in a captured neutral location, or with friendly forces. The U.S. player, until late in the game, is limited to just 1 supply depot, which is here. A second depot is available the turn in which the U.S. is allowed to invade Veracruz and can be placed at the discretion of the U.S. player. A third depot enters play with Scott's force. If Scott invades Veracruz and succeeds, the depot is placed in the Veracruz box. And U.S. units may trace 3 locations from Veracruz. However, it can never be picked up and relocated. If Scott decides not to invade, it becomes a third depot that they can chain on their way down to Mexico City by land. To To avoid confusion, there's some definitions. Friendly locations you owned at the beginning of the game. First supply depot has to be in such a location. Neutral locations are these 4 spaces. They're not controlled by either player at the beginning of the game. These may be captured by either side in the course of play. Well, I would say actually 2 of them are captured already, but they are not owned. That's important. Enemy location, they're not friendly. Enemy locations are those owned by the opposing player at the beginning of the game. These can be captured by friendly forces during the course of play. So the notable important thing here is the Mexicans actually can't place depots in the United States. That's the thing you might have missed in all these words. Okay. Contested locations contain forces of both sides. Supply can be traced into but not through. On to the Chrome. And we're almost done. The invasion of Veracruz. Okay, during the actual campaign, the United States had a capacity for amphibious invasion, and they decided to use it. On game turn 8, you roll a die to see what game turn the U.S. player is allowed to make an invasion of Veracruz, if desired. And on a 2 through 5, it'll show up on turn 22. Otherwise, it might show up on turn 10 or 12. The die roll, big difference, right? The game doesn't go 22 turns, so gosh, that's interesting. Neat. I don't know if that's what they mean. It's time to go look for the errata. Yeah, I really don't think they've got this right. Okay. I know that there's some errata. There's an addenda which does not include that. I know that there's some errata that's been mentioned somewhere. So far it had seemed okay until I saw that there's no turn 22, damn it. Okay, whatever. If the die roll is done in secrets, only the U.S. player knows the actual roll. If you don't trust him, cut his fingers off. You can use chits. That would probably be the best choice. Not included in the game. If the U.S. decides to invade, on game turn 8, a certain number of strength points and leader worth are withdrawn from the map. These are picked up from the map and placed on the invasion box. These withdrawn units plus reinforcements, which will be listed on the reinforcement table. Okay. So I think this is supposed to be game turn 11 on the 2 through 5, because here they say the next reinforcement, these forces are going to come in on turn 10, 11, or 12 as per below. So I think 22, somebody just hit the wrong button and no copy editor was available for 3W games, and it's definitely a consistent problem in their games. Okay. If the U.S. elects to not invade, the units are not withdrawn on turn 8. The die is still rolled, and the reinforcements come in on the indicated turn, but not as part of an invasion. Okay, if there's an invasion, if Veracruz is unoccupied, the U.S. forces may land freely but move no further that game turn. If it's occupied by Mexicans, the U.S. must attack and force the Mexicans to retreat out of Veracruz to allow the U.S. to land in that location. If they fail, the invasion force is withdrawn and goes back to Texas 2 game turns later. The invasion attack is performed during the invasion phase, and if successful, the U.S. forces are placed in the Veracruz box. The invasion attack is like a regular combat, except the U.S. player only gets 1 column shift when attacking instead of 2. If the Mexican player attacks the invasion force before it moves out of Veracruz and causes it to retreat, it retreats back onto the U.S. ship and goes back to Texas in 2 turns. This is true only for the invasion turn and the turn after. If forced to retreat later, the only way to retreat would be by sea. The force is eliminated. But there would almost certainly be some way to retreat. The Mexican invasion of this U.S. Before the start of the play, the Mexican player secretly rolls a die. The result is the turn in which the Mexican player may initially invade the United States. The Mexican player may at any time invade neutral locations. Polk decision. President Polk was hesitant about invading Mexico. The U.S. cannot move into locations south of Monterey, which is here. It's this line here. Until they're released. On turn 6, the U.S. player rolls a die and sees, and that'll be turn 7, 8, or 9 that they're able to do that. If the Mexican morale drops below 110 by the start of game turn 15, the Mexican player only gets 10 of the 20 listed conscripts in Mexico City on turn 15. Neutral strip. The 4 locations that are neutral can be captured by either side, allowing supply tracing and morale point accumulation. Yeah. Okay. Reinforcements is really just a compendium of the reinforcements. I'm obviously not going to babble my way through that. The important part, though, is on game turn 8, when the Veracruz is made, the U.S. has to withdraw 4 seasoned infantry, 4 regular infantry, 3 field artillery, and the leader Worth. Depending on the die roll on turn 8, and I guess, whether or not you're making the invasion is clearly signaled by the withdrawal. Depending on the invasion die roll, the United States can invade or receive the next reinforcements on channel 11 or 12. If the U.S. decides to invade Veracruz, they get 4 regular infantry, 2 field artillery, 2 cav, a depot, and Scott, plus the forces withdrawn on game turn 8, in the invasion box. Plus 1 depot is placed in any captured location with any friendly forces or anywhere in friendly territory. Okay. If the U.S. decides not to invade, forces were not withdrawn, then place the following reinforcements in Texas, the same ones as before, with 2 depots to place. If the U.S. decided to invade Mexico and had withdrawn forces but changes their mind, they can enter the withdrawn forces plus Scott 1 game turn after the turn the invasion was to take place. So you can call the invasion off, and they show up in Texas. The 2 depots can then be placed. Mexico City on turn 15, the conscript based on the morale. Okay, what's up with this morale? Well, so if the United States captures Mexico City and holds it till the end of a Mexican turn, or the Mexicans hold New Orleans and hold it until the end of a U.S. turn, the game is over. It's an automatic victory on that side. The U.S. wins if the Mexicans are reduced to 90 or less morale. They start with 235 at the end of any game turn. As the U.S. captures Mexican locations, they will be subtracting the morale value, which is, I believe, the left-hand number? No, the right-hand number, for each location that they take. Now, Mexico City's at 50, but maybe it can cause... At the end of the game turn, you don't have to hold it. Well, you do, because the Mexican turn comes second, so... Okay. The Mexican player wins if the United States morale drops below 0 on the morale track. Now, the U.S., kind of like an Imperium Romanum, has to do stuff. They start the game at 30, but they lose 5 morale points each and every turn unless they capture a Mexican location worth 10 or more morale points. Right. For each Mexican location captured, the U.S. gets those morale points on its morale track. In addition, if Veracruz is captured by sea, the U.S. gets an extra 5 morale. I don't think that boosts it to a 10 morale location, though. If the Mexicans capture locations in the United States, the Mexican morale is increased and the U.S. morale is reduced. Supply units, when they're destroyed, come back on the next player turn, so no biggie there. Yellow fever. This was left out of the rules. If during turns 10 through 13, a unit begins in Mazatlan, Tampico, or Veracruz. Is this Mazatlan? No. I don't know where Mazatlan is. Definitely not there. Over here. And these are not marked, but they are swamps, right? Well, Veracruz is not. Tampico and Mazatlan are. Veracruz is a city, so... No. Ooh, no. Peyote. That unit won't receive replenishment points for being in that location during those turns. These are the yellow fever zones. In addition, each unit gains 5 FP, friction points, each turn it remains there during the specified turns. This is true even if it stays there and after if it starts in a yellow fever zone and after moving ends up in the same or another yellow fever zone, or if it's forced to retreat back. The turn Scott invades doesn't count because he didn't start the turn in Veracruz. That's it. It feels like a really light set of rules. It almost feels like somehow they've managed to, and we'll see how well and accurately it represents things, but somehow managed to state a fair amount of stuff in not many pages. Now, it says 10 pages, but there's a cover page and a back page, so we're talking 8 pages of rules. This is a really simple game, but it's a simple game that doesn't really correspond with anything, it's not like the hex movement or anything like that's there that has to be explained every time that you can quickly assimilate and say, I know more or less how that works, I just have to look at the paragraph on Zones of Control or whatever. This whole game is kind of new stuff, especially that weird combat system. So let's take a look at how it works, and good God, let's hope that I can maintain some level of sanity throughout, because I'm not talking about the game itself. I'm having a really rough time with it right now.